Right now, there is a distinct heavy sensation residing directly in the center of your throat. You might be lying perfectly still in the dark, but inside your chest, a beautiful, vibrant world is locked behind a wall of cold hesitation. Perhaps you spent the day silencing your own insights, swallowing your words, or deleting a creative project before anyone else could see it. There is a specific ache that comes from hiding your true expression. It is the painful paralysis of a mind that desperately wants to speak or paint. This creative impulse is instantly choked back by a wave of old shame. You carry a deep fear of being ridiculed or misunderstood. This fear locks your jaw. It freezes your hands. It convinces you that staying quiet is the only way to remain safe in a critical world. Let us look closely at the quiet room around you right now. The night air outside is perfectly cold, dark, and still. A faint, pale shadow plays across the rough texture of the plaster wall opposite your bed. This gentle shape is cast by a distant amber street lamp, filtering through the dark winter leaves of a cedar tree. Your head sinks into the deep, firm support of your mattress. You can feel the heavy weight of the dark room pressing gently against your eyelids. The room smells faintly of dried lavender and old paper. Outside, the world has stopped demanding your constant participation. There are no critics waiting for you in this darkness. There are no audiences to please or judges to face in this quiet hour. Your environment is completely undisturbed, silent, and protected. You are not broken because your voice has grown silent over time. This long creative paralysis is not a sign of personal failure or a lack of talent. Your inability to share your authentic self is simply a protective crust that your mind built to keep your sensitive heart safe from a critical world. Tonight, we are not going to force your frozen waters to move. We will not demand that you find your courage or force you to create something beautiful before you feel ready. This evening is a safe sanctuary where you are allowed to be completely unproductive. We are simply going to sit together in this soft, unhurried stillness. We will honor the unexpressed beauty you carry inside without requiring you to prove its worth to anyone. Here is a surprising truth from the ancient path of the Buddha. The mind does not become free when it finally wins the approval of the entire world. It becomes free when it realizes that both praise and blame are merely passing winds that possess no real substance. We often think that our creative block is a problem of talent or confidence. In reality, it is fear pretending to protect your ego from the danger of being seen. We treat our words and our art as if they are solid pieces of our identity that must be defended at all costs. The ancient teachings remind us that your true nature is actually empty and fluid like water. When you stop trying to use your voice to build a permanent monument to yourself, the terrifying ghost of judgment naturally loses its power over your life. Right now, dear friend, you might be replaying old moments of criticism. Perhaps you can still hear the exact voice of someone who once made fun of your ideas or looked at your creation with cold indifference. When we experience that kind of emotional exposure, our nervous system registers it as a deep, structural danger. The mind then makes a silent, fierce vow to protect the soul from ever feeling that exposed again. It builds a thick layer of self-doubt around your inspiration. It tells you that if you never show your true heart, you can never be wounded by another person's rejection. But this protective silence eventually becomes its own kind of torment. You end up carrying a heavy, ungrinded harvest inside your spirit, while your life feels completely frozen on the surface. Let us look together at the central image of our journey tonight. Imagine a narrow, snow-choked mountain ravine, where the winter frost has taken total possession of the landscape. Down at the bottom of the icy creek sits a massive ancient watermill built from heavy timbers of dark oak. Its great, spoked wheel is meant to turn continuously with the current, grinding grain to nourish the entire valley. But right now, the entire river has turned to thick, gray ice. The heavy oak spokes are locked completely rigid within the frozen crust of the stream. The wheel cannot move even a fraction of an inch. Inside the mill house, the massive wooden gears are perfectly silent and cold. Everything is stalled. If a traveler came upon this silent mill, they might think the wheel was fundamentally broken. They might bring heavy iron axes to hack violently at the ice sheets around the base. They might try to force the great oak spokes to turn by using ropes and brute strength. but hacking at the wood will only splinter the beautiful craftsmanship. Forcing the gears with aggressive pressure will only break the internal alignment of the mill. The wheel is not failing because it remains motionless. It is simply waiting for the environment around it to transform. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter. Our journey will lead us down into the hidden warmer spaces beneath this frozen valley. We will meet an old monk who understands the deep language of winter, water, and blocked spirits. His quiet actions will show us how a frozen heart can finally begin to thaw without any force at all. But before we climb into that silent ravine, let us bring this awareness back into the space of your own body. Take a very slow, gentle breath in through your nose, letting the cool night air fill your lungs. Now let the breath go out through your mouth with a soft, long sigh. There is no need to rush your healing tonight. Your creative block is exactly like that frozen watermill wheel. You have spent a long time trying to force yourself to be expressive through willpower. You shame yourself for staying quiet, believing that if you are just strict enough, you can break through the ice. But this internal pressure only drives the frost deeper into your throat. Shame is just another cold wind that hardens the river. Tonight, we are going to stop hacking at the ice. We are going to let the heavy wooden mallet drop from your tired hands. You do not have to resolve your creative paralysis or plan your next project before you close your eyes. We are simply going to let the frame of your body go completely soft. Imagine that far beneath the frozen surface of your self-criticism, there is a hidden, warm mountain spring that never freezes. This thermal spring has been flowing quietly in the dark for your entire life. It is the deep current of your natural, unconditioned awareness. Tonight, we are going to trust this hidden warmth. We will let it rise softly through your chest and your throat, melting the rigid sheets of judgment from the inside out. You are safe enough to let the river go slack, because the water knows exactly how to flow when the frost finally clears. Let us allow the boundaries of your immediate surroundings to soften, slipping quietly away into a different time and space. Imagine a high, narrow mountain gap where winter arrives long before the rest of the world. In this silent landscape, many years ago, lived a young craftsman named Jiro. He was a man who possessed a deep natural gift for shaping raw timber. He understood the hidden language of cedar, oak, and pine. When he was young, he worked with a light heart, carving beautiful utility items and furniture for the people of his valley. He found immense joy in letting his inner world take shape through his hands. One spring, Jiro spent 3 long months carving a grand communal bench for the village square. He poured his entire spirit into the wood, smoothing the grain until it felt like silk and carving intricate patterns of wild ferns along the base. It was his most authentic creation. When the bench was unveiled, a wealthy and highly respected elder of the village walked forward. The old man looked at the bench with a cold, distant expression. He publicly ridiculed the work, calling the fern carvings childish, clumsy, and completely unsuited for a serious village square. The crowd fell silent, nodding in agreement with the powerful elder. The shame of that public exposure hit Jiro like an icy blast of wind. A heavy, suffocating knot tied itself directly in the center of his throat. He felt exposed, foolish, and deeply endangered by the sudden judgment of his community. His mind quickly drew a terrifying conclusion. It decided that showing his true creative heart was a dangerous mistake that would always lead to rejection and exile. From that afternoon onward, his hands lost their fluidity. Every time he picked up a chisel, a cold wave of hesitation would freeze his fingers. He could no longer hear the music of the wood. The creative spring inside him had completely locked up, leaving him silent and deeply discouraged. Seeking a place where no one could judge his silence, Jiro packed his few belongings and walked high into the northern ridges. He sought out a narrow, snow-choked ravine known as the Valley of the Silent Mills. In this cold gorge, the winter frost had taken absolute possession of the land. The mountain river was completely locked beneath a thick, gray sheet of ice. Down along the frozen banks sat 3 massive watermills built from heavy timbers of dark oak. Their giant spoked wheels, which usually turned with the rushing current to grind grain for the high villages, were perfectly motionless. The ice had climbed up the wooden spokes, locking them into the rigid crust of the frozen stream. Jiro took shelter in the primary mill house, a dark, freezing structure that smelled of old flour and deep winter. He spent his days sitting in the absolute silence, staring at the motionless wooden gears. He felt a deep, painful kinship with the stalled machinery. He felt exactly like those frozen wheels, carrying a heavy harvest inside his spirit but unable to move a single inch. Living in a small stone hut near the upper mill was an elderly monk named Master Kanzan. He was a man of immense quietness, who spent his days tending the silent structures of the ravine. Jiro watched the old monk every morning. Master Kanzan did not seem bothered by the total freeze of the valley. He moved through the snow with slow, deliberate footsteps, clearing the wooden walkways with a simple broom made of twigs. The soft, rhythmic whisper of the broom against the frosted timber was the only sound that broke the heavy winter silence. One dark afternoon, the internal frustration became too heavy for Jiro to bear. He entered the lower mill house, determined to force the machinery to work through sheer effort. He looked at the massive wooden gears that connected the water wheel to the grinding stones. Located directly in the center of the main shaft was a huge hand-forged iron pin. This pin was covered in a thick layer of white frost, locking the primary gear firmly into place. Jiro believed that if he could just dislodge this single iron pin, the internal gears would be freed, and the wheel might finally turn. He seized a heavy river stone and began to strike the frozen iron pin with all his might. The impact created a sharp, hollow ring that echoed loudly through the dark timber walls. The metal was so bitterly cold that it bit into the skin of his palms, leaving raw, red marks. He struck the pin over and over again, pouring his entire internal frustration into the blows. He sweated despite the freezing air, his breath rising in thick, frantic clouds of white mist. But the iron pin did not move even a fraction of an inch. The frost held it with an absolute, unyielding grip. The more he fought the metal, the more his arms trembled with exhaustion. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter. Master Kanzan stepped softly into the dark mill house, his twig broom resting against his shoulder. He did not yell at the young man, nor did he tell him to stop his frantic work. He simply stood in the shadows, watching Jiro hit the frozen iron with the heavy stone. After Jiro delivered one final, exhausting blow that sent a painful jar up his own elbows, the old monk walked forward. He knelt down in the cold dust next to the primary gear, looking closely at the frost-covered iron pin. Master Kanzan did not reach for a larger hammer, and he did not add his own strength to the struggle. Instead, he reached into his sleeve and pulled out a small, hollowed-out elderberry branch. He blew gently through the small tube, directing his own warm, steady breath directly onto the frozen surface of the iron pin. Jiro watched in complete disbelief. The old monk sat patiently in the freezing darkness, breathing tiny currents of warm air onto the massive metal block. Slowly, by small degrees, the thick white frost on the iron pin began to turn to tiny drops of clear water. The ice did not shatter with a dramatic crash. It simply softened, weeping quietly down the dark face of the forged iron. Master Kanzan looked up at the young craftsman, his eyes reflecting the dim winter light. He asked Jiro why he was spending so much energy beating the iron when the river itself was still asleep. The old monk spoke softly, his voice matching the slow rhythm of the falling snow outside. He told Jiro that the iron pin was not his enemy, and the frost was not a personal insult. The mill was silent simply because the season of cold had arrived. He explained that trying to force a frozen wheel to turn through raw violence would only splinter the oak spokes and break the internal alignment of the gears. A sudden, sharp wave of emotional recognition washed over Jiro's tired mind. He dropped the heavy river stone into the dust, his bleeding palm stinging in the cold air. He looked at his own raw fingers, and then he looked at the quiet, weeping iron pin. He realized that he had spent the last several years of his life doing exactly what he had just done to the machinery. He had been beating his own silent heart with the heavy hammer of self-criticism, trying to force his voice to be brave through raw willpower. He had viewed his creative block as a shameful personal defect that needed to be conquered with violence. He saw now that his spirit was not fundamentally broken. It was simply frozen by the memory of the old village elder's ridicule. The fear had acted exactly like the winter frost, locking his internal gears to protect his sensitive nature from another dangerous blow. By fighting his own silence, He had only driven the cold deeper into his throat. Jiro stood perfectly still in the quiet millhouse, listening to the low hum of the mountain wind outside the door. For the first time since that painful day in the village square, he stopped fighting his own paralysis. He allowed his hands to hang loosely by his sides. He accepted the total, freezing stillness of the ravine without trying to force a single change. He saw that the river would move when the season was ready, and his heart would flow when the internal frost finally cleared from the inside out. Let us sit quietly in the dim, cold interior of that mountain millhouse, listening to the absolute silence that followed the dropping of the stone. The heavy river rock lay completely still in the dust, and the frozen iron pin remained embedded in the dark oak gear. Yet the entire atmosphere within Jiro's spirit had undergone a profound shift. He was no longer panting with the frantic energy of resistance. He was no longer exhausting his limbs by striking a frozen surface that could not yield to violence. Have you ever felt out this exact exhaustion in your own life? Have you ever picked up a heavy, invisible hammer and beaten your own spirit because your voice felt blocked or your creativity felt frozen? When we experience a moment of severe criticism, or when our authentic expression is met with cold rejection, our immediate human instinct is to treat our own vulnerability as a fault. We tell ourselves that we should have been stronger, or that our ideas were fundamentally worthless. We turn the harsh words of another person into a permanent internal judge, and then we begin to police our own thoughts before they can even reach our lips. This is the tragic mechanism of self-sabotage. We try to force our frozen waters to move by using the harsh energy of shame. We believe that if we are just critical enough with ourselves, we will somehow shatter the ice and reclaim our power. But this internal violence only drives the frost deeper into our throat. This is exactly where the ancient insights of the Buddha offer a gentle, revolutionary path toward healing. The teachings point toward a profound human trap, known as the 8 worldly winds. These winds are the opposing forces that constantly sweep through the landscape of our lives, changing our emotional weather from dawn until dusk. They are praise and blame, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute. The old village elder who ridiculed Jiro's beautiful fern carvings was simply a manifestation of the wind of blame. It was a cold gust of air that passed through the village square on a single spring afternoon. It was temporary, empty of permanent substance, and completely outside of Jiro's control. The tragedy, however, was not that the cold wind blew. The tragedy was that Jiro's mind caught that passing breeze and froze it into a solid glacier within his own chest. We do this every time we take the passing opinions of a critical world and treat them as permanent truths about our identity. We cling desperately to the desire for praise, and we run in absolute terror from the threat of blame. This desperate grip is what the ancient path calls attachment. We believe that our voice, our art, and our ideas must be perfectly received by everyone, or else we are not safe. We treat our expressions as solid monuments to our ego that must be defended at all costs. When the monument is criticized, we feel as though our very survival is endangered. But the deeper lesson had not yet revealed itself. The ancient wisdom reminds us that your true nature is not a solid, fixed monument that can be permanently ruined by someone's disapproval. Your spirit is fundamentally open, spacious, and fluid like a mountain river. The thoughts you think, the words you speak, and the art you create are simply the natural ripple of water moving through the terrain of your life. They do not belong to a permanent ego that must be verified and protected by an audience. When you realize that you do not own the water, the terrifying ghost of judgment naturally loses its grip on your throat. The river does not stop flowing just because a single traveler calls it muddy. It simply continues its journey toward the sea. Let us make a crucial distinction here, speaking directly to the unique texture of your suffering tonight. The Buddhist path does not ask you to stop feeling your emotions. It does not instruct you to become a cold, unfeeling sheet of ice that is indifferent to human connection. A heart that forces itself to feel nothing is not a healed heart. It is simply a frozen fortress, locked in a state of permanent winter because it is too terrified of the warmth. The sorrow you felt when your expression was rejected was a genuine natural response to a cold wind. It was the first chill of winter, and it required time to pass through your nervous system. The real suffering occurs in the way the mind holds that chill afterward. It lives in the extra layers of ice that we build through our own continuous self-judgment. The original criticism was a single arrow thrown by someone else. The endless replaying of that criticism, the constant doubt, and the decision to silence your own voice are the extra arrows we strike into our own chest over and over again. The Buddha was not asking us to reject the reality of a cold season. He was showing us how to stop adding our own winter to an already frozen valley. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal as you lie here in the dark. Think of how Master Kanzan approached the frozen iron pin. He did not bring a massive iron axe to smash the metal. He did not yell at the frost or demand that the ice disappear immediately. He simply sat down in the cold dust, brought his own warm breath to the surface of the metal, and allowed the transformation to happen by small degrees. This gentle, unhurried attention is the true definition of compassion. Compassion is the willingness to meet your own frozen, blocked states without turning them into a reason to hate yourself. It is the understanding that your creative paralysis is not a personal failure. It is a deeply sensitive protector that grew cold to keep your heart from being wounded a second time. When you look at your creative block through the eyes of compassion, the internal atmosphere begins to shift. You stop treating your silence as a crime that must be punished. You look at the lump in your throat and the tightness in your chest as areas of your spirit that are simply waiting for a warmer season. You bring your own soft awareness to the blockage, just as the old monk brought his breath to the iron pin. You do not demand an immediate melt. You do not force yourself to become perfectly expressive by tomorrow morning. You simply sit with the coldness, offering it a soft, unhurried space to exist without judgment. This gentle approach is also the heart of what we call mindfulness. Mindfulness is the spacious capacity of your mind to notice the ice without becoming the ice. It is the ability to observe a cold, doubtful thought and to recognize that it is just a temporary freeze in your awareness. When a thought tells you that your voice doesn't matter or that you will always be misunderstood, mindfulness allows you to pause. You look at the thought and you softly say to yourself, "This is just the frost forming on the gears." The thought is an event in your mind, but it is not the reality of who you are. You are the vast, deep riverbed that contains both the ice sheets and the flowing water beneath them. The quality of impermanence reminds us that no winter lasts forever. The ice sheets that currently lock your creative wheel are not a permanent feature of your existence. They are a passing phase in the grand cycle of your spiritual growth. The mind tries to turn a single season of rejection into a permanent law of the universe. It tells you that because you were once ridiculed, you must remain silent for the rest of your days. But this is an illusion born from fear. The frost will eventually yield to the deep, subterranean warmth of your own natural awareness. You can afford to drop the heavy stone of your self-criticism tonight. You can let the machinery of your life rest in the quiet dark, knowing that the water already remembers how to flow when the environment finally changes. Let the heavy weight of the mountain ravine settle softly into the background of your awareness. You are here in your own room, completely supported by the darkness and the quiet. There is absolutely nothing you need to accomplish. In this moment, you do not need to fix your voice. You do not need to solve the creative silence that has held you captive for so long. If it feels right, let your attention rest gently on the natural movement of your breath. Do not try to change the way you breathe. Do not try to draw a deep, artificial lungful of air. Simply observe how your body draws breath on its own, like water rising and falling in a quiet well. Perhaps you notice that your breath feels shallow. Maybe it feels slightly restricted, trapped high up in your chest. Even noticing this restriction is completely enough. You are simply observing the present climate of your body, without trying to alter it. Let us bring an unhurried, kind awareness to the physical spaces where the frost has settled. Pay close attention to the delicate muscles around your jaw and your mouth. Notice if you are holding your teeth tightly together in the dark. Many of us carry the memory of old criticism in a locked jaw, bracing our face against the possibility of a sudden blow. If it feels comfortable, you might let your lower jaw drop slightly away from your upper teeth. Let the root of your tongue become perfectly soft, resting easily on the floor of your mouth. Notice the space around your throat, where Jiro felt that heavy, suffocating knot of shame. There is no need to force this throat to open right now. You do not need to speak a single word in this room. You are safe enough to let this area rest in absolute silence, completely free from the requirement of expression. Feel the deep weight of your shoulders sinking down into the fabric of your bed. The mattress beneath you is fully prepared to receive your entire tiredness. It does not ask you to hold your posture straight. It does not require you to present a strong exterior to the world. You can let your shoulder blades spread wide, melting comfortably into the bedding. Notice the soft warmth radiating just beneath the skin of your chest. This internal warmth has been present through every cold season of your life. It is the steady, geothermal heat of your basic human awareness, and this is where the mind begins to soften. Bring your gentle awareness down into the palms of your hands. Many times we approach our life like Jiro, striking the frozen obstacles of our mind until our fingers are raw and red with exhaustion. We grip our tools too tightly, trying to smash our way through the blockages. If it feels right, let your fingers loosen their grip completely. Let your palms turn upward, resting open and soft against the fabric of your blanket. There is no heavy stone for you to hold tonight. There is no frozen pin for you to fight in this dark hour. You can allow your hands to become perfectly still, letting go of the constant urge to fix your reality. Now, let us gently look at the landscape of your thoughts. Notice one specific memory or worry that has been asking for your attention tonight. Perhaps it is a bitter voice from your past, telling you that your ideas are foolish. Maybe it is a cold, heavy doubt that warns you to stay hidden so you remain safe from ridicule. Do not try to push this doubtful thought out of your sight. Do not pick up a heavy stone to strike at it. When we attack our own doubts, we only increase the cold friction inside our own spirits. Instead, you might try to name this emotional pattern very softly to your own heart. Perhaps you can whisper to yourself, "This is the frost forming on my gears. This is my inner protector trying to lock the wheel to keep me from feeling shame." By naming the pattern, you step outside the freezing ice. You are no longer the cold blockage. You are the quiet, spacious witness observing the cold. Imagine placing this specific self-doubt directly onto the frost-covered iron pin of the watermill. See the metal block resting rigid and motionless inside the dark oak machinery of your chest. You can see how long it has been held fast by the ice of past judgment. But tonight, you are not going to hit the iron with a river stone. You are going to let the heavy mallet drop completely from your tired hands. You are going to step away from the struggle of trying to force yourself to be expressive or confident through sheer willpower. Instead, imagine that your gentle awareness is like the old monk's warm breath moving through the elderberry branch. Every time you exhale, you might imagine directing a soft, golden current of warmth toward the frozen iron pin. You are not demanding that the ice shatter instantly with a loud crash. You are simply sitting down in the dust next to the gear, offering your own unhurried presence to the coldness with each slow, quiet exhalation. Watch the thick white frost on the iron begin to soften by small degrees. The rigid ice begins to weep, turning into tiny, clear drops of water that trickle harmlessly down the face of the metal. But the deeper lesson had not yet revealed itself to the young craftsman, and it is still unfolding for you. Let the image of the weeping iron pin change naturally in its own time. You might feel the rigidity in your chest beginning to give way to a subtle, fluid spaciousness. The thick ice sheet surrounding the heavy oak wheel begins to lose its grip. The frozen crust turns soft, dissolving into the clear water of the mountain stream. There is no pressure to heal the entire block tonight. If the ice remains thick and unmoved, that is completely permitted. Your mind has been accumulating this frost for many years to protect your sensitive nature. It is allowed to melt slowly, at its own natural pace. You can return to this soft, breathing warmth whenever you are ready. Even a tiny micro-moment of internal softness is a beautiful victory over the winter. Let your awareness float gently back into the immediate reality of your quiet room. Feel the cool night air moving softly across your forehead. Listen to the absolute stillness that fills the far corners of this physical space. The harsh critics of your past are not present in this darkness. The village elder who ridiculed your creation has no voice in this quiet room. The future audience has not yet arrived to judge your worth. You are completely allowed to be unfinished tonight. You do not need to polish your art or find your voice before you close your eyes. You can leave all your ungrinded grain resting quietly in the bins of the mill house. For the next few hours, your only purpose is to let the riverbed warm up from the inside out. Let your body sink deeper into the dark, trusting that the water always remembers how to flow when the environment finally turns soft. The winter did not lift from the valley of the silent mills for many weeks. The thick sheets of gray river ice remained locked around the base of the massive oak water wheels. Jiro stayed in the dim interior of the mill house, learning to exist within the heavy stillness. The acute pain of his past exposure had begun to soften, but a deep, stubborn numbness still lingered within his spirit. He had stopped beating his mind with the heavy hammer of self-criticism, yet he still could not bring himself to create. His tools remained wrapped in their canvas cloth. The creative currents of his soul were no longer churning with panic, but they were still completely motionless beneath the frost. He had accepted his silence, but he had not yet discovered how to live with the vast uncertainty of an unexpressed life. One evening, as a fresh blanket of powdery snow fell over the dark pine trees, Jiro felt a small spark of desire return to his hands. It was not the grand, ambitious urge to carve another communal monument for the village square. It was simply a quiet, fragile longing to touch wood again. He went out into the frosted woods behind his hut and selected a fallen branch of an old elderberry tree. The wood was light, hollow, and seasoned by the mountain air. Jiro carried the branch back to his hearth and sat down by the dim orange coals. He spent the entire night meticulously scraping the gray bark away, revealing the pale, smooth wood beneath. He carved 6 small finger holes along the length of the branch, intending to shape a simple mountain flute. He wanted to see if his breath could still create a single note of beauty. The process was slow and meditative, requiring absolute precision. To seal a tiny split near the mouthpiece of the instrument, Jiro gathered a small amount of golden pine resin from the trees outside. He warmed the resin by the fire until it became a thick, sticky liquid, carefully smoothing it over the wooden seam. He left the flute on his table to cool in the deep frost of the midnight hours. The next morning, Jiro lifted the pale elderberry branch to his lips. He took a slow breath, his heart fluttering with a mixture of hope and intense dread. He closed his eyes and blew gently into the mouthpiece, expecting to hear a clear, high melody rise toward the rafters. But no music came out of the wooden tube. The sound was completely muffled, flat and hollow. The air entered the flute, but it seemed to choke instantly inside the dark chamber, producing only a breathless, scraping hiss. Jiro felt a familiar, cold wave of despair rush through his veins. The immediate thought that surfaced in his mind was absolute and devastating. He told himself that he was completely cursed, that his talent had been permanently taken from him, and that his voice was fundamentally dead. His inner critic immediately used this failure as a final proof that he should never try to express himself again. He wanted to smash the elderberry flute against the stone hearth and throw the pieces into the snow. Before he could destroy the instrument, a soft knock sounded against the heavy wooden door of his hut. Master Gensho stood on the threshold, wrapped in a faded indigo robe that was dusted with fresh frost. Gensho was an old, reclusive instrument carver who lived even higher up the mountain ridges. A man who spent the coldest months sitting quietly beside a frozen waterfall. He did not ask for permission to enter. He simply walked into the room, his eyes falling directly on the carved elderberry branch in Jiro's trembling hands. The old man reached out his weathered palm, and Jiro handed the silent flute over without a word. Master Gensho lifted the instrument to his own eye. Looking down the dark hollow of the central chamber, he did not try to play it. He simply smelled the wood, noting the sharp scent of the fresh pine resin. He looked into Jiro's discouraged face, noting the deep tension that had returned to the young man's jaw. The old teacher did not offer any words of comfort, nor did he tell Jiro that everything would be fine. Instead, he slipped the flute into his deep sleeve and signaled for the young craftsman to follow him out into the cold morning air. They climbed together toward the highest ridge of the ravine, where the gray limestone cliffs rose like giant walls against the winter sky. The path was narrow and completely unmarked by human footsteps. Jiro followed the old monk through the deep drifts of snow, his breath rising in white plumes, his mind still heavy with the shame of his failure. After an hour of silent climbing, Master Gensho paused in front of a dark, narrow cleft in the rock face. The opening was so small that a traveler could easily walk past it without noticing its existence. A faint columns of warm white mist escaped from the stone crack, rising gently into the freezing mountain air. Master Gensho stepped through the narrow opening, and Jiro followed him down into the darkness. They descended a steep, slippery path of wet stone, moving deeper into the subterranean belly of the mountain. As they walked, the biting cold of the winter valley began to recede. The atmosphere shifted dramatically, becoming thick, humid, and remarkably warm. The air smelled of damp earth, wet sulfur, and ancient stone minerals. Jiro could hear a low, continuous rumble echoing through the darkness, a deep sound that vibrated through the soles of his boots. It was the sound of a massive hidden geothermal current flowing beneath the bedrock of the mountain. The dark tunnel suddenly opened into a vast, breathtaking underground cavern. High above their heads, giant limestone formations hung from the ceiling like frozen stone icicles. But down on the cavern floor there was no ice at all. A wide, bubbling stream of thermal water wound its way through the dark rocks, its surface shimmering with a soft, iridescent blue light. The water was intensely hot, sending thick clouds of pale, comforting steam up into the darkness. Along the edges of the thermal river grew carpets of thick, vibrant green moss, thriving in the permanent warmth of the deep earth. It was a hidden sanctuary of life and movement, existing completely undisturbed beneath the frozen crust of the mountain. Master Gensho walked over to a flat, wet rock sitting directly beside a bubbling pool of hot water. He pulled the elderberry flute from his sleeve and laid it gently down upon the green moss. He did not draw a knife to alter the wood, and he did not bring an iron wire to clean the inner chamber. He simply invited Jiro to sit down next to him on the warm stone floor. Jiro watched the old monk with intense confusion. He asked Gensho why they had climbed all this way just to sit with a broken instrument. He insisted that the flute was a failure, because his hands had lost their precision. He believed he had ruined the wood beyond repair. The old instrument carver looked at the pale elderberry branch resting in the steam. He told Jiro that the wood was not broken, and his hands had not lost their skill. He pointed out that when Jiro had applied the hot pine resin by the fireside, the bitter cold of the mountain hut had caused the amber liquid to behave unexpectedly. The frost had seized the resin before it could dry naturally, forcing it to leak deep into the inner channel of the instrument. The resin had hardened inside into a solid, impenetrable block of amber ice, completely choking the airway of the flute. Jiro immediately stood up, his mind rushing to find an immediate solution. He told the old monk that he would go back to the hut to get a sharp iron rod. He believed that if he could just force the iron down the center of the flute, he could scrape the hardened resin out by force. He wanted to hack at the blockage, just as he had struck the frozen pin with the river stone. He could not bear the tension of holding an instrument that could not make a sound. Master Gensho reached out and gently took Jiro by the sleeve, guiding him back down onto the warm stone seat. He told the young man that using an iron rod would only splinter the delicate walls of the elderberry branch, ruining the flute forever. He explained that true expression cannot be recovered through acts of desperation or external violence. He instructed Jiro to do something far more difficult than fighting the wood. He told him to simply sit there in the warm steam and watch the instrument remain silent. This was the moment where Jiro's relationship with his suffering began to undergo a subtle transformation. For the next 2 hours, the young craftsman had to sit with the absolute uncertainty of his creation. He had to look at his silent flute without trying to fix it, without trying to escape the room, and without using shame to punish his own spirit. Every time his mind began to spin a terrifying story about his permanent failure, he caught himself. He remembered the old monk's lesson about the seasons. He looked at the pale wood resting on the green moss, and he chose to stop treating his doubtful thoughts as absolute truths. He allowed the instrument to be unfinished, silent, and blocked, without concluding that he was worthless. As they sat in the comforting warmth of the geothermal cavern, the internal environment around the flute began to change. The thick, hot steam from the mineral pool continuously bathed the pale elderberry branch. The deep heat of the mountain moved slowly through the grain of the wood, reaching into the hidden dark of the inner channel. Jiro watched in absolute silence as the hardened block of pine resin began to respond to the warmth. It did not shatter with a loud explosion. It did not require any aggressive scraping from an iron wire. The amber ice simply softened, turning back into a clear golden liquid. Slowly, by small degrees, the liquefied resin began to weep naturally out of the lowest finger hole, dripping harmlessly onto the wet green moss below. The airway of the flute was clearing itself from the inside out, simply because it had been placed in an environment of total warmth and unconditional patience. Jiro sat perfectly still, his eyes filling with quiet tears as he watched the golden drops fall. He realized that his own voice did not need to be forced or beaten into submission. It simply needed a warmer sanctuary to thaw. Let the warm steam of that hidden geothermal cavern linger within your awareness. Think about the golden pine resin weeping naturally from the hollow wood without a single scratch from an iron rod. This quiet image contains the entire anatomy of your own healing. When you lie awake in the dark, you are often trying to force your own spirit to be different than it is. You are looking at your silent voice or your blocked creativity as a shameful problem that must be conquered immediately. You want to reach inside your throat with a sharp tool and scrape away the hesitation. But this aggressive internal pressure is the exact thing that keeps the frost alive in your veins. Let us look directly at the hidden engine that causes this internal freeze. The mind possesses a deep, obsessive craving for absolute certainty. When you share an idea, or when you speak your truth, you are stepping out into an open landscape without a shield. You cannot control how another person will receive your heart. You cannot dictate whether they will offer you a warm smile or a cold glance of indifference. This lack of control feels incredibly dangerous to your subconscious mind. To protect you from the terrifying possibility of future shame, your inner guardian chooses to shut down the system entirely. It decides that a silent room is far safer than a critical world. It turns the water to ice before anyone else can muddy the stream. Maybe you have felt this exhausting process within your own thoughts today. You find yourself continuously replaying a past moment where your expression was rejected or misunderstood. You listen to the ghost of an old critic, letting their voice dictate the boundaries of your current life. Then you switch to rehearsing the future. You mentally script your next conversation, trying to anticipate every potential judgment before it can occur. You analyze your words from every angle, searching for any vulnerability that might lead to ridicule. This constant mental preparation feels like a form of wisdom. It feels like you are protecting yourself in reality. It is just fear pretending to be a shield. This endless forecasting is the cold wind that thickens the glacier inside your chest. The deepest part of our suffering occurs when we turn a temporary freeze into a permanent definition of who we are. When the watermill wheel remains motionless for a season, it does not cease to be a wheel. It does not lose its inherent capacity to grind grain. But the human mind looks at a temporary block and immediately builds a rigid monument of shame around it. You tell yourself that you are fundamentally uncreative, or that you are a silent person who has nothing of value to offer. You take a passing winter in your life and you turn it into your permanent identity. This is what the ancient insights of the Buddha reveal as a deep error of perspective. You are grasping onto a false, frozen image of yourself, forgetting that your true nature is as fluid and changing as the river. Let us consider a fresh way to understand this internal mechanism. Imagine a delicate green branch of a young willow tree growing beside a mountain creek. When the heavy winter snow falls from the sky, it naturally lands upon the outer leaves of the branch. The weight of the snow is a real, unavoidable event in the natural world. This is the first pain of life. It is the criticism you received, or the creative project that failed to find an audience. If the willow branch remains soft and flexible, it simply bends low under the weight of the snow, letting its tips touch the cold water below. It does not break, because it does not resist the reality of the winter. It holds the snow lightly, knowing that its internal veins are still full of living sap. But what happens when the branch becomes rigid with panic? If the wood hardens itself to fight the snow, trying to remain perfectly upright and unbending, it creates an intense friction within its own fibers. The cold air begins to freeze the living sap inside the bark, turning the flexible wood into a brittle, frozen stalk. When the next layer of snow falls, the rigid branch cannot yield. It snaps with a sharp crack, splintering its own structure because it refused to bend with the weather. The extra suffering in your life is exactly like that brittle rigidity. The original criticism was just the snow falling on your leaves. The thick crust of self-doubt, the shame, and the refusal to feel your own vulnerability are the ice sheets you built inside yourself to fight the storm. The Buddha pointed out that true peace does not come from stopping the snow from falling. You cannot force the world to be permanently warm, and you cannot guarantee that every person will validate your voice. The landscape of human life will always contain both praise and blame. True freedom comes from changing your fundamental relationship with the cold season. It begins when you stop treating the presence of frost as a sign that you are broken. When a doubtful thought enters your awareness, you can choose to meet it with the flexibility of the living green wood. You can allow the doubt to sit on your leaves for a moment, without letting it freeze the sap inside your heart. Now let this wisdom come even closer to your own life. Your core awareness is not the frozen watermill wheel, and it is not the brittle ice sheet either. Your true nature is the vast, enduring valley that contains them both. The winter may sweep through the gorge, locking the surface of the creek in gray frost, but far beneath the ice, down in the deep, dark bedrock of your spirit, the warm geothermal springs are always flowing. This internal warmth is your capacity for gentle, unconditioned presence. It is a space that cannot be diminished by the criticism of an elder or the silence of a blocked throat. You do not need to fight your own hesitation tonight. You only need to rest your attention in this deeper, warmer current. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal as you lie here in the dark. When we stop fighting ourselves, the internal civil war naturally comes to an end. You can look at your creative block with an entirely new quality of understanding. Your silence is not a shameful failure of courage. It is simply a very loyal, very tired protector that has been standing guard over your sensitive heart for a long time. It grew cold because it believed that freezing your voice was the only way to keep you from being destroyed by shame. You can acknowledge this protector with absolute gentleness. You can look at the lump in your throat and softly say to yourself, "I see how hard you have been trying to keep me safe." By offering this unconditional kindness, the internal environment immediately begins to transform. The thick frost of self-judgment begins to turn to soft water. Let this realization settle deeply into the marrow of your bones tonight. There is no audience waiting for you to perform in this dark room. There are no critics standing in the corners of your space, waiting to evaluate your thoughts. The world outside your window is completely quiet, wrapped in the dark linen of the night. You are allowed to be a silent, uncarved piece of timber for the next few hours. You do not need to justify your existence through production or expression. You can leave the elderberry branch resting quietly on the moss. Let the weight of your head sink down into the pillow, allowing the deep warmth of your breath to melt the rigid edges of your day. You are safe enough to let the river go soft, because the water always knows how to find its way home in the dark. The comforting warmth of that subterranean thermal river slowly recedes, blending back into the familiar, quiet layout of your evening room. You are resting here in the dark, surrounded by the ordinary objects of your modern world. The ancient ravine of the silent mills remains with you, serving as a quiet mirror for your daily struggles. This deep freeze Jiro experienced is not confined to ancient parables. It is an emotional landscape you walk through every single day of your modern life. The frozen watermill wheel and the blocked elderberry flute are living symbols of the ways you silence your own heart when the world feels critical. Think about how this internal winter shows up on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. You are sitting at your desk or standing in a crowded room. When a sudden spark of inspiration visits your mind, you feel a beautiful, genuine impulse to share an original idea or to speak a truth that matters deeply to your spirit. But before the words can even reach your lips, a cold wave of hesitation sweeps through your chest. Your throat tightens instantly, creating that familiar heavy lump of anxiety. A doubtful voice whispers that your insight is foolish, or that you will be misunderstood by the people around you. You immediately delete the draft, or you choose to look down at the floor in silence. You choose the safety of numbness over the danger of exposure. In that tiny moment, you are locking your own wooden gears, protecting the oak spokes of your identity from the cold wind of blame. Consider the modern ritual of checking your digital screen for reassurance. You send a meaningful message to someone you care about, exposing a small piece of your true vulnerability. You wait. You monitor the device, watching the hours pass without a response. When the silence lingers, your mind begins to spin chaotic loops of panic. You feel an intense, frantic urge to fix the situation, or to cross-examine reality to find out what you did wrong. You pick up your phone every few minutes, desperately searching for a single text that will act like a sudden fire to warm your frozen spirit. This constant checking is exactly like Jiro striking the frozen iron pin with a heavy river stone. You are trying to force an emotional melt through frantic, external action. You believe that if you just receive enough approval from the outside world, your internal blockage will finally disappear. But this frantic pressure only drives the frost deeper into your throat, making you more dependent on the next warm breeze from someone else. You exhaust your vital energy trying to manage an audience that you can never truly control. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal as you rest here in the dark. Perhaps you lie awake at night, comparing the quiet rhythm of your current life to the loud success of the people around you. You look at their achievements through the lens of a screen, viewing them as massive water wheels turning fluidly in a warm summer valley. You look at your own stalled projects, your unspoken words, and your hidden talents, feeling terribly behind in the race of life. You turn your quietness into a personal crime, wrapping your sensitive heart in a heavy layer of daily shame. You try to cure your slow pace by forcing yourself to perform, replaying every past mistake until your mind splinters from the internal friction. You tell yourself that you are not enough, believing that if you are just strict enough with your own spirit, you can break through the ice. But shame is just another freezing wind that hardens the riverbed. The path of Buddhist wisdom does not require you to instantly transform into a perfectly bold creator. True freedom is practiced in the tiny, unhurried pauses of your ordinary daily routine. When you feel the familiar lump of anxiety forming in your throat during a difficult conversation, you can choose a completely different response. You do not have to pick up a heavy iron rod to scrape away the fear by force. You can simply pause for one quiet second before you react. You can take one slow breath, allowing the cold hesitation to exist without obeying its command. You look at the doubt, and you recognize it as a passing frost rather than the permanent reality of who you are. This means learning the beautiful art of caring deeply for your life without gripping the outcomes too tightly. You can share your creative work or speak your true thoughts while completely relinquishing the need for universal praise. You can write the draft, paint the canvas, or offer the kind word, letting the expression flow out of you like water moving over a riverbed. If the world receives your offering with warmth, you welcome the sunshine. If the world meets your heart with indifference, you allow the cold wind to blow past without letting it freeze the living sap inside your bark. You stop treating the reactions of others as a final judgment on your basic human worth. And this is where the modern mind begins to soften. You can practice this same gentle discipline when you are trying to manage your relationships. You can allow the people you love to have their own quiet winter seasons, without interpreting their distance as a personal rejection. You do not need to constantly force their gears to turn to prove that you are safe. You can sit with the vast uncertainty of human connection, letting your hands drop open into your lap just like Jiro in the cavern. You accept the present moment exactly as it is, without trying to manufacture a guarantee for tomorrow. When you stop trying to control the river, you naturally reclaim the immense energy you used to spend on the perimeter patrol. Tonight, you can grant yourself absolute permission to rest without needing to earn it first. You live in a loud world that tells you that you must always be producing, expressing, and turning the wheel to justify your place on the earth. But the watermill does not feel guilty because the winter creek has turned to solid ice. It does not look at the frozen landscape and conclude that it has failed its duty to the village. It simply rests in the quiet stillness of the gorge, allowing the season of cold to do its necessary work. You do not need to grind a single grain of harvest before you close your eyes tonight. You do not need to find your voice or resolve your creative block before the morning arrives. You are completely allowed to be an unpolished, uncarved piece of timber in this dark room. All of your unfinished projects and unanswered questions can remain on the floor beside your bed. For the next few hours, your only true purpose is to let the frame of your body go completely soft. You can trust the deep, subterranean warmth that is already moving through the bedrock of your spirit, knowing that the water always remembers how to flow when the frost finally clears. The dark hours have now taken complete possession of the valley. The noise of the modern world has retreated far beyond the distant mountain ridges. In this quiet room, your long attempt to force your own healing can finally stop. You have spent so many hours holding yourself rigid against the possibility of judgment. You have carried the heavy hammer of self-criticism for so long. But right now, there is absolutely no audience left for you to please. There are no critics waiting for your voice in this stillness. The environment surrounding your bed is perfectly silent and undisturbed. You can feel the massive weight of your physical form sinking into the deep comfort of your bedding. Your breathing has slowed down to a natural, effortless flow. Each breath enters like a soft mist, bringing a quiet ease to your throat. Each breath exits like a gentle release, letting the tension thaw from your bones. You are allowed to stop solving your life tonight. Let the small, tight muscles around your jaw release their grip. There is no need to hold your face in a mask of confidence anymore. The dark space within your mind is completely permitted to remain uncarved and quiet. Let the root of your tongue sink down softly, freeing your throat from the heavy requirement of expression. You do not need to speak a single word in this darkness. Your shoulders can widen, melting completely into the support of your mattress. They do not need to carry the heavy wood of your unpolished projects anymore. Feel the slow, unhurried warmth radiating beneath your skin. This internal heat moves softly through your chest, through your arms, and down into your open palms. Your fingers are resting loose and soft against your blanket. The tools are wrapped in canvas on the floor. The heavy stone has been dropped into the dust. Your physical form is becoming completely heavy, resting securely on the solid foundation of the earth beneath your bed. The image of the frozen watermill wheel is changing now. The gray sheets of winter ice are no longer an enemy that you must conquer with violence. The frost is simply water that has gone to sleep for a season. The massive oak spokes are resting quietly in the frozen creek, completely protected from the friction of the world. Inside the dark millhouse, the wooden gears have stopped their striving. There is no grain that needs to be ground in this hour. The harvest can wait quietly in the wooden bins until the spring arrives. The pale elderberry branch flute rests peacefully on the soft green moss inside the geothermal cavern. The hardened pine resin has completely melted away, weeping out of the hollow wood by natural degrees. The internal channel is completely clear and open. But the instrument does not need to produce a single note tonight. It can remain silent, resting in the warm steam of the deep mountain cave. The melody is already whole inside the wood, waiting for the environment to turn soft. You are returning home to your own fluid nature. Your spirit is not a rigid monument that can be permanently ruined by the wind of blame. You are the vast, enduring valley that contains both the winter frost and the flowing water. Let your awareness sink down beneath the frozen surface of your thoughts. Descend quietly into the deep, warm currents that flow through the bedrock of your spirit. These subterranean waters are completely untouched by the opinions of the world. They flow with an absolute, unhurried certainty in the dark. With each slow exhalation, allow the rigid edges of your day to dissolve into this warm stream. Let the doubtful thoughts drift past like loose pine needles moving down a river. You do not have to hold on to them. You do not have to prove them wrong. You can simply let them float out into the open space of the night. You are safe enough to let the river go soft. You do not need to fix your creative block before the morning sun appears. You do not need to decide how to share your voice while you are lying here in the dark. You are allowed to be beautifully unfinished tonight. All of your unanswered text messages, your deleted drafts, and your heavy worries can remain outside the boundary of this rest. For the next several hours, your only purpose is to let the ice thaw from the inside out. Let your consciousness become like clear, melting snow trickling down a mossy bank. It moves softly, without any effort or pressure. It joins a vast, deep river that flows silently through the dark pine woods. The river is completely unhurried, moving with a steady pace under the quiet midnight sky. The weight of your body is fully surrendered to the night. The breath is becoming smaller, quieter and more distant. It resembles the soft murmur of water moving over smooth stones in the dark. The internal frost has cleared entirely, leaving only a vast blue open space within your chest. You are floating on the surface of this deep peace, completely carried by the natural rhythm of the universe. The winter gorge is silent, the thermal springs are warm, and the deep river is flowing toward the sea. You can close your eyes and let the water take you completely. You can sink into the velvety, dark rest that has been waiting for you all along. What if the authentic voice you have been fighting to create was never something you needed to build, but a hidden river that already knew how to flow the moment you stopped freezing the stream?